just to keep me on track. This way a bit. So I'll kick off. Are we?
Yes.
We're good, Craig?
Does anyone know how to flip the video in a YouTube stream? Because I think we've got it the bit where it does that thing that goes with
Mirror images.
mirror image.
No.
Nope. I'll download and fix it later. So, are you ready?
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't give an introduction, so I'll do that. So I'm Chris. I work for Sage. I'm a director with the global security team. So Sage is a big company. We have a centralized global security team, and my role has changed very recently. So I'm now setting up and running what we rather grandly call the Office of the CISO. It's a function to try and improve the way with which security engages with the wider business, and also a function to try and drive some of the strategic projects we've got. Prior to that, I worked in the AppSec team. I'm not a technical AppSec specialist, so if you ask me any deep technical questions, I will point to somebody else in the room. But that was where I came into Sage. Please don't turn the TV off. That would be bad. Let's try that one. Is this one? There we go. Perfect. Yeah, so with background, I did an undergrad degree in web application development from Walworth in the tech recent years, and I've moved around a bit from small software companies into IT management positions, and then I decided to specialise in security, and that's where I am. I'm loving it. To start with the question, can I ask, and I really do want this to be a conversation, so what does secure by design mean to people in this room? Is that a term you've heard? Does it mean something to you?
Implementation is done with the idea of looking at the security. The need to be secure. There shouldn't be some API that make one of us be sure that all was supposed to do something, not do something.
Yeah, so access control.
Because it kind of means three things to me, I think.
Okay.
So the one is around the secure development, software development, Ontario stuff, making sure your software and also the rest of the stack, so processes on potentially firmware, but then the other side is around user, like making it so secure by design for the user. So if there's some security climate settings that their default to good, better. And then there's the life cycle of whatever you built and supporting it afterwards.
Yeah. And
that's the elephant in the room is how long should you be on the hook for making sure that any dependencies, etc. So to me, it's like I'm generally in the first space. I'm not saying I don't give a shit afterwards, but that's where I am usually. But yeah, it's quite, and it depends on which document you read is where the concentration is.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very commonly used phrase. It means different things to different people. It's all roughly similar. It means designing things to be secure and trying to do that as early as possible and not bolting it on at the end. But it can mean anything from looking at IoT security, which the first logo is about, the Secure by Design collection. It can mean more broadly an architectural approach to secure design across all sorts of IT systems, which the NCSC guidance is about, and that sort of architectural principles for secure design. The MOD have got an understanding of that, which we'll get some input on later, which, as I understand it, is about replacing their old assurance approach and trying to build that security thinking into projects from the beginning. But it means something very different to what I'm going to talk about today, which has caught me out recently. The police have got secured by design, which is about building security, physical security. And then we've got data protection by design and by default, so slightly different language, but a similar concept with a different focus baked into GDPR. So it would be useful just to set the scene about what we are going to talk about, and that's this particular paper, which was released in April this year. It was released by a collaboration between US, CSER and NCA, UK, NCSC, and then some partners from around the world. And it's called Shifting the Balance, and you can read the rest of it there. It's a position paper. It's asking for consultation, so it isn't regulation, it's not rules that need to be followed, but it is targeted at commercial software manufacturers. So, of which Sage is one, and I think it's interesting because a lot of these regulations or requirements tend to get filtered in through critical national infrastructure, defence, government procurement, etc. So this is specifically targeting the commercial sector and software that's sold to customers. As I said, please ask questions throughout. I'd like this to be a conversation as much as possible. I know that there's a screen and I'm talking, so that can be difficult, but you shout out and jump in. I'll start with sort of my interpretation of the paper, and just going to grab this because I am akin to a bedtime story, going to read from it a bit. But it is targeted. This is my interpretation. So I'm not saying I agree with these statements because I think some of them can be quite punchy in their attention, and they need debate, they need discussion. This is what I think the paper is trying to say, and what I would encourage, if you do decide to pick this up and read it and take it back to your organisations and think about it, is think about it in the spirit of the paper. It isn't a set of rules to be complied with if you squint hard enough. It's an intent to follow to try and improve the security of the economy, of the ecosystem that we work within, and the only way that it will achieve its roles is if we look at it with that spirit in mind. So this is my interpretation of it. So targeted at commercial software vendors. It's very strong on saying that we must understand the context of how our products are used by our customers in the context of their business. It puts the security of your customers at the heart of what you do as a business. And I think that's quite a shift, and I'll say a little bit about that in a minute. But I think when we talk about software security, we quite often look at, okay, let's look for vulnerabilities, let's look for open source vulnerabilities in libraries that we use or containers that we use. Let's think about patching, let's think about those sorts of things. But how often do we think of security as how can this product that we are creating be misused by people to cause damage to our customers? Perhaps not in ways that are technical vulnerabilities that can be exploited, but are functionality of the product that can be exploited to commit fraud or something like that. It really does sort of say that the security of your customers should be a core business goal. It calls out saying, actually, that should be the primary goal, ahead of developing features, ahead of speed to market. I'm just going to put that down. I'm using old-fashioned. And I think that's quite a big ask. Software companies need to move fast. They sell based on features. So asking software companies to say, stop, think about security first and make that your primary business objective, the security of your customers, and then think about how you go to market and how you sell your product. I think that's an interesting idea that is worthy of debate. To achieve that, you're going to need some leadership buy-in. It's very strong on saying that this is an organizational change, it's a cultural change. If you don't have that buy-in, it simply won't work. As with a lot of security, you can do a lot bottom up, I think, but fundamentally, when it comes to changing approaches, you need that leadership buy-in. And since this is saying potentially invest more, increase the cost of producing your software products, and therefore you're going to have to increase the cost at which you sell it. It's about commercial strategic decisions, about how we run our businesses. So it's going to absolutely require leadership buy-in.
Can I say something? One thing that I feel like a bit of a reader because I did actually read it today. I believe it for another reason because it's been re-released with a couple of other certs supporting it.
Oh,
Three other
really?
countries, some feedback. But one thing I did notice that I think is missing, and it might be in there, might not be in the guide, was around delaying to market as well.
Yeah.
Because it's around the cost, blah, blah, blah. I know, we're delivery centric, everything. I've got a stick on my laptop that says, the strategy is delivery. And it pees me off every time I read it because I say, no, the strategy should be secure delivery. So lots of places don't get the fact that sometimes they might not meet their date or they need to put it into their date. And I think it was implied with this, but I didn't get it, and that's often the cases.
Yeah.
Oh, we can't afford to spend the time pen test it because A, we haven't got pen testing, we haven't notice, and it's going live on next day.
Yeah.
It's the norm, isn't it? Very possible. I think those places that's happened.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That was just something I think
No,
is missing in it.
I think you're right. I think it does use language that sort of implies it, but it isn't perhaps as strong as it could be in calling that out. So it talks about hard decisions about investments and saying, actually, you should be looking at perhaps recoding your solution to use languages that are fundamentally more secure than older languages. And you should be investing in aspects of your product that won't be shining new features to your customers, but they improve the security for your customers. So it does talk about that, and it does talk about sacrificing speed to market as well in favour of product security. But I don't think it calls out saying, hang on, potentially you will need to delay go-to-market decisions if you determine that your product isn't secure enough or doesn't meet your values, etc.
So on that speed to market thing, that's very countercultural.
Yeah.
In that the watchword is it's no longer the larger the small, it's the quicker the slow.
Yeah.
So that's quite countercultural.
Absolutely. Hugely, I think, and this is why I think it needs debate, and it's something I'm going to try and do at Sage, is have that debate with the product teams, with the commercial side of the business, to say, from a security perspective, this makes sense. We need to think about this. But actually, I would argue that our job as security professionals is to work out how we can speed up the approach to market by embedding security early, because in more mature companies, the security happens, but it often happens at the wrong time. So you can produce your product and get to a security gate of some sort, and then have to go back again. So actually, security is slowing that process down as well. It appears as though security is slowing the process down, but it isn't. It's the process is not configured.
It's the same sort of model they've said about testing for 20 or 30 years
Yeah.
or more. And it's a false economy. You have to be able to deliver that quality, that security, of which security is a part of quality, early enough and in the process embed it like it's second nature. Now, I don't particularly like the deliver fast model all the time because it does open up people to make mistakes and we are fallible. And it's not, it can be thoughtful, being agile and things like that, but just like any quality aspect, it's often left to the last minute. You're dead right in it. I think this is a really mature approach. But if I brought that into the office, there would be a lot of like, what is this? What's the value here? So I'd have to take a lot of time to pick out the salient points.
I think a lot of what we do in security is about influencing people, releasing them and bringing them along. And often we're not particularly good at that. I attended a roundtable discussion about the size of security teams for mid-sized businesses a couple of weeks ago, and I asked the question: what skill set are you missing in your teams? What skill set are you finding it difficult to recruit for? And around the table, everybody says business skills, communication skills, the ability to sit between technical security and the rest of the business. And I think that's such a crucial role in any security team, because a fundamental part of what we're here to do is to convince people that what we're saying is important, and that it bears listening to and should be put in place. You need a very, very strong security leader to have the authority within a business to say, no, that's not happening. And that often doesn't exist because that security leader will report into IT or into a commercial leader of some sort who can override that decision.
How much does security into like auditing in a company like Sage, for instance, I would have thought there needs to be certain checks and balances before releasing anything.
Yeah.
How often is that auditing process happening?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to make this too much about Sage, but you're absolutely right, that process exists. We have a release review process, which is effectively a gateway, that we examine everything that goes out, and there's a risk model attached to that. But if we don't embed these concepts and ways of thinking and security in early enough, they do become blockers.
Any bug, you don't want to fix it in production, you want to fix it.
Yeah.
Every nail right away.
Yeah,
Design
absolutely.
before implementation phase.
So yeah, I think that's really important. So
I was going to ask something, sorry, I don't really want to get on, but the last point on your last slide, it's something that I think, like marketing, actually, the people who are doing the marketing, so secure feature should not be chargeable.
Yeah.
If I had paying for every service, I'll make that last year, I'm not making Microsoft, where the base tier doesn't have login, doesn't have security and logging events and stuff. And I go, well, we're not doing that, and we've got to pay the stupid price for the corporate one, now in 1% licenses.
Yeah.
If I was in a small business, I'd be stuck.
yeah, you want to do that.
And that to me is, they shouldn't, I always think it should be outlawed that you should charge for that. But to me, it's like saying, oh, well, you can't have seatbelts in your car because you're buying a cheapskate version.
Yeah.
Well, there is a minimum standard, isn't there? And then to me, it's like, well, as a minimum, any product that's rolled up by the organization should actually give that to the customers. Either they're watching it once or they're not watching it, so whatever. But yeah, it's sold as like an extra feature, and that really pleases me.
Well, I think this
Every
is
time
a
I look at it, it's like,
really good example of where we need a discussion about it, because I can see both sides of the argument. I absolutely buy into that. There should be a minimum baseline of security, and I reckon that's probably what this paper is trying to push towards. But I can also see, it also suggests actually use security as a differentiator for your product. Well, hang on, if you're trying to drive a standard and minimum baseline, then your differentiators become something that's more advanced.
Yeah.
In which case, why not charge for them? Because you've invested the time and the effort to develop them. So there is an argument that some security features, take an access control model. You can imagine a tier of a system where you have a fairly basic access control model with roles that are pre-configured, they're not particularly changeable. You're either an admin or you're a basic user or something like that. And then as you go up the tiers, potentially you get more flexibility and granularity in determining what that access control model looks like. Is it okay to charge for that extra granularity? You've invested time in developing those features. So I think that again is all of this needs talking about. What we can't do as security professionals, I don't think, is just go, yeah, that makes sense from a security perspective, that is how it should be. We need to have the empathy with the rest of the business to say, let's have a conversation about it and determine what we think is the right approach for our business. I think there's some really, really interesting language in some of the definitions around these. So, as I said, I was going to read you a bedtime story, so here we go. So it says, secure by design means that technology products are built in a way that reasonably protects against malicious cyber actors. And what does that mean? What's reasonably, and how do you assess that? But I think it answers the question, because it goes on to say you should perform a risk assessment. And I think that a lot of these things are, well, reasonably means you put some thought into it. Doesn't actually determine what the reasonable standard is. It just determines that there should be a process by which you determine it's reasonable. And as long as that process is logical and stacks up, then you kind of meet the sniff test, as it were. It talks about defense in depth, which is a concept I think we're all familiar with. And key to what it talks about is tailored threat models. And I think this is a really key part of it. We're speaking about threat modeling and threat dragons, that's quite topical, but understanding, you go right back to the beginning of the conception of the idea and going, okay, let's map this out, what does it look like? And think about misuse, think about threats, think about how somebody could attack it, think about what could go wrong in that build process or the design process. That's how you speed things up, because you build all the security in at that point as part of the idea, so that, and I really strongly believe that security can speed these things up, because no mature business who wants to protect itself, never mind its customers, is going to release something they know is fundamentally insecure or problematic. So if you put any amount of due diligence in that process, at some point you're going to get a gateway, at which point you go, got to go back and revisit this. So the earlier you can bake that in, and the more ownership of that process you can give to product teams, the faster they can move, the more in control of that process they are. So actually they've got more flexibility, more freedom to deliver their products as quickly as possible. So a mature security concept, secure by design, speeds product teams up if it's baked in and mature and evolved properly. So the other concept is wrapping up as secure by default. And Chris, I think you sort of were talking about this when you were saying what does it mean to you? It's that you deliver it securely and that you look after it and it's sort of maintained on an ongoing basis in a secure way. And a big part of the language of the paper that talks about secure by default is saying actually when you deliver a product, it should be secure. It shouldn't require your customers to read a manual, to harden things by shutting down settings or turning things off or turning things on or configuring access control models or whatever that looks like. It should be, by default, ready to use, secure to an extent. And it talks about loosening guidelines rather than hardening guidelines, which I think is a really interesting concept. It's deliver it locked down, and if people want to reduce those restrictions to increase flexibility, then fine, give them the options to do that. We make it very, very clear that when they do, this is going to increase the risk. This is the consequence of doing this, rather than what we tend to do at the moment, which is hardening guidelines. So it's an interesting idea.
So it's more akin to like your WAF rules or something. At the moment you'd say,
Yeah.
don't never have any. It's everything just knows what you need.
Yeah.
Just switch up what you need. I think with SaaS tools, I find that because they're their own little ecosystem and a series of choose checkboxes and double negatives and all sorts of things in there. For the user, it is a mindful. We have own goals where people have configured stuff that they thought was private that turned out to be public, or and those sorts of mistakes. When you look at it, you think, yeah, they've done that.
Yeah.
Because they think public means public in the organisation.
Right.
It doesn't mean properly public.
Yeah.
But it's not absolutely clear. And so there's those sorts of ones where I think SaaS tools have got a lot to learn. A lot of the bigger ones could do a lot better. And I always like it because people say, "Oh, can I use this tool?" Yeah, and is it secure? I said, well, yeah, as a company, they're secure. As a product, it is secure, but it's a bit like a pen. It's really handy to write with, but you can stab someone in the eye with it, and then it shows them. And so it's to say, I always use it. One of those where it's a knife, that for a knife. So if you don't use it properly, then you're going to get yourself in trouble. So someone loan it and look at it.
That's exactly the point, isn't it? Don't make it difficult to use properly.
But this is that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do it so that they have to, they're saved from any own goals.
Yes. I think that use of language is really interesting one here, because that can be very good. Don't never not disallow something.
Amazon, if anyone set up an Amazon S3 bucket, they had a lot of problems with people leaving their buckets open. So they, rather than fixing the defaults and fixing the actual thing, they put an extra layer on top of it. But they did it as a double negative. It's like tick the box to make it not public. It's like, or something along those lines. You're sort of going, what do I do? I got really angry at them, but they just went, well, it's deployed now, we're not changing it because we've got documentation written for it. And so,
Human nature, so try it that way. Oh shit.
The thing is, a lot of people don't know. They just keep changing things until it works. And that's where you end up with the any rule. They set up with the firewall rules, and they may want to start off correctly, and they sort of put in a few port forwarding things, and then they go, something else is not working. Any. Well, it works. Okay, I'll sort it out later.
That's a really common behaviour, isn't it? And actually, that's exactly what happens, because people don't want to break things, or they're in testing mode. They just want it to work while they're developing it. And they set these open rules up and then leave them and never get changed. Whereas if the product was hardened by default, they'd have to make the conscious choices to use that security.
Like you connect to a Windows machine. I assume it's changed now. but where the printer sharing and the file sharing thing was enabled by default, when a lot of people weren't using it. So why is this even a thing?
It becomes even more complicated. We've got legacy products, that are perhaps desktop products.
Yeah.
You know, we've been sold for decades and you're still selling them because they're popular and they do the job. But when you start to think, okay, how do we deliver that in an on-premise way to our customers? How do we ensure that that's delivered in a way that's secure? And okay, let's get a partner to work with the customer to help them set it up securely. Then that's sort of a clear sign, I think, that you can go, okay, why do we need a partner to deliver our product securely? That's putting a requirement on the customer to have to do that, to require that. So I think this is what that's trying to avoid, is trying to say, you know, actually, can you build that in? Can you re-engineer your products? Can you make them secure just out of the box? So you don't have to. So a couple of principles that it pulls out in summary. So it's a burden of security should never fall solely on the customer. I think, you know, solely is a key word there. There's the shared responsibility model, especially in SaaS products or cloud products. Embrace radical transparency and accountability. Now, this is really key, and I think this actually will also potentially get a lot of should inspire a lot of discussion, because this is about not seeing CVEs as a negative, not seeing publicly talking about vulnerabilities in your product as a negative, but seeing it as sharing the security approach with the community and the customers so they can secure themselves, which is fine in principle, but so much more complicated in practice. You need fixes before you can do that, otherwise you're just advertising an exploitable problem. If those fixes aren't in place or they've been there for a very, very long time, then you can be embarrassed by that. You can say, well, it's been there for 8 years, sorry, let's just fix that and be quiet about it. So that, I think this is a really complicated area. You know, how do you do that in a way that preserves reputation? As a security community, we might go see the value in information sharing, and we might be able to go, yeah, actually, I do want to know about what problems you've got, so I can learn from them and vice versa. But as a customer community, I don't think they're there yet, necessarily. So that's worthy debate as well.
Yeah, that's what I was to do. I'll mention a hypothetical scenario. So a place that codes in the open and then uses vulnerability SaaS tools that also publish in the open. Sounds like a good thing, so long as you have got those quality gateways in place. On the other hand, I have argued in the past that showing those vulnerabilities, which someone else could run the tool across your own repositories, they could do it themselves, but it's a bit of an own goal if you haven't fixed it. And it's a difference between coding in the open and working in the open.
Yeah.
To me, and that's like, it could encourage really good behaviour, because people would think, shit, we've absolutely got to do that. We've got to fix it, and we have to have the gateway. But as long as everybody in the development community knows that and it follows it, that's fine. We have a very complex development with different teams.
Yeah.
We're not put the same quality gates in. It starts to get a bit messy. You think, I could have just advertised the fact there's a vulnerability. I don't think it's in production.
Yeah. It's a flip side, isn't it? Here, it's starting to see mandatory requirements for incident reporting, breach reporting, and people being prosecuted for not doing that. What would the collective response be if there was mandated vulnerability reporting, that you had to publish a vulnerability whether you fix it or not within X number of days? Suddenly would companies go, right, we need to completely reshift our focus and make sure we don't have any zero tolerance approach? Would that be a good behaviour, or would that be interesting?
I'm wondering what role the central government behind this. And I was sort of thinking about the financial sector, the financial crisis, and the legislation that was passed after that literally forced financial institutions to start doing things better. What role do the central government play in the cyber security arena, and would something like that be effective?
I think we see the answer in who published this paper. I think the real answer is it can't be a single national government that dictates it. It's got to be an international collaboration, because if you create an uneven playing field, then your software companies simply go elsewhere to potentially escape the rules framework. But I think in national governments, plural, have a big role to play. And I think that the approach that we have at the moment is too slow. The approach we have at the moment very typically sees a rules framework being developed, then it's either applied to critical national infrastructure, defence, or government procurement supply chains, which is then intended to filter out to the broader ecosystem as those companies have suppliers, etc. But that just takes so long to filter down through the ecosystem, I think, and actually having a framework of rules that specifically targets the commercial sector and say, no, this is just a baseline. We're protecting all businesses, all customers, all people, like GDPR, for example, did. Then I think that's potentially a good thing.
It's like Cyber Essentials.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I did. I'm trying to go through one of my companies. It's a real pain. It just feels like it's a government sales tax to get onto the new cabinet. Does anybody else have it here in their companies? Like,
Yeah,
no.
a couple of times.
Yeah.
What was the thing you found you did?
Oh, they're
difficult?
terrible with BYOD now, so you can't really do BYOD. You're trying to convince them that containerization is okay and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, apparently it's getting worse. And we had an email saying, your renewal's coming up, you can use 6 months in advance, and the rules are about to change, so we recommend you do it now, which is it's basically telling you to game the system, like do it now, get another year under your belt, and yeah.
Okay. But so it's more of the administration of like the licensing, or the put your name on the register kind of side of it.
I don't know, it's just we found it very hard as a small company, like a 2 or 3 person company.
Yeah.
And even just things like when the questions and answers were going back and forwards, it was bonkers. It was like, are you going to do this, this, or this? And then we were like describing our approach to a particular problem, and it's like fail. And like, why have we failed? It's like literally they were saying, are you going to write it in the policy, or are you going to implement technical control? So we wrote back, we'll write it in the policy, and they're like, pass. But if we have one attempt at a failure, and that's it, you've got to pay again.
Okay. So that process presumably needs to change, but the actual things they're asking you to do,
It's very on-prem centric.
Yeah.
So it was written in a time when you just have physical networks.
Mhm.
So if you're a company that's got literally no on-prem IT, it kind of does not compute. They don't really, the questions on, and they haven't really changed it either.
No.
Problem, but
Yeah, it's just trying to think of how to make it better, because I think I agree with the principle of it, but it's
Yeah.
the implementation.
no, I
that-
would agree. Yeah, it's exactly that. Yeah, the principle's fine. The way they go about trying to extract them. You end up with like, I remember back in the day, Vodafone was like one of the first companies who got Cyber Essentials. And the whole purpose was Cyber Essentials was small companies who didn't really just wanted to, change the default password on their firewalls. And
Yeah.
this was the main reason for having it. And then Vodafone got it, and you're like, really? And then she scoped it to like,
That's a byproduct. It's talking about your standards and things rolling down from government. As one of the people who looks at what gets in, well, I don't know what gets in G-Cloud, they procure off of G-Cloud, but have they got cyber? Our actual procurement framework says, have they got cyber?
Yeah,
essentials or
it's-
cyber essentials?
yeah.
And it's not binary.
it's like £400 excluding that. And like we got so 3 of us, one of the team members basically spent like 2 weeks writing documentation about how he was going to, copy, just nabbing it from the internet and just saying like, this is our handling it. It's only 3 of us. Like we just do some consultancy, we won't even take any data, but
It's interesting, isn't it? Because the point of it, as I understand it, was meant to be the minimum baseline. Like this, just literally just do the basics.
yeah.
But it's taken you 2 weeks, and you're knowledgeable security.
And we got rejected the first time.
So
Because we gave too much detail, and then
Yeah.
we just put it to literally a bullet point of it's in a policy document. It was like,
Happy.
It's really interesting. Someone there is asking help to get
through it as well. So,
it's-
honestly, I think I'll pay somebody next time to do all the documentation for me.
Well, you try to principles-based sort of approaches to things rather than sort of compliance-based.
Mm-hmm.
So if you define a set of principles and then trust a body of qualified people to go in and assess is that principle being met, that applies a great deal more flexibility to assess these things. But the problem with that approach, which I think is what they have with Cyber Essentials and what's being tightened up, is that the range of requirements and effort needed to get certification, depending on who you contract with, is just so varied that it becomes a bit of a fuss. You see that with ISO as well. Just time. I won't run through these, but the paper does list a number of tactics that are tied back to this secure software development framework. And they do the same thing for secured by default as well. Some of these things are interesting, mandating MFA, single sign-on, and the guide talks about considering user experience. If you're going to do something by default, consider what the impact on the user will be. This is another sort of passion point of mine. I think user experience and security is so important and is often overlooked. If you don't design or consider user experience with what you do from a security perspective, controls you implement, rules, policy you put in place, people will get around it. And they'll be sneaky about getting around it. So then you've created a risk that is difficult by its definition to uncover, because people are trying to avoid detection because they know they're breaking rules. So user experience and making sure that you don't, you've got a right amount of friction. You want friction in some places, you don't want friction in others. Designing that in, that is a whole discipline I think the security sector has got to get better at.
I've got a quick question on one of those. I think I don't go back to the list. Sorry, I don't know if I'm in a senior moment. I'm not sure what software authorization profile is. I'm trying to think.
Yeah, so they're talking about the effectively the authorization profiles for users in a product. So it's the roles-based access controls,
all that stuff.
yeah, or whatever it is here. So building it and considering it properly and thinking what the impact of that would be.
Have you ever heard of the SSO tax website? SSO.tax. So it's the SSO wall of shame, and it's got basically all the vendors when they charge for SSO and how much it is per user per month, like the base cost. When you have to sort of get like that license before you can enable SAML or whatever, you'll list it out. So it's kind of what's it called? SSO.tax. Yeah, it's a good one. Not actually that big.
Generally, we will mandate, if it's available, we say, and pay, go to SSO. And there is obviously, it helps with joint legal stuff, and all the other things that come with it. On the other hand, I'm waiting for the one day, and I watched the Opta incident where they had a secondary authorized identity provider. You think, yeah, when it goes, and it could just be a massive big bang. So it's like, am I better off with all my eggs in one basket? I still think I am. But every so often I just think, well, for ages I've been saying, yeah, everything just goes SSO. Takes a lot of the other stuff out of the way. But I don't know what others' thoughts are on that. It's like, yeah, as long as you trust your SSO provider in that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not strong identity, isn't it? You have one single strong identity, password, all that sort of stuff, and then it's all things software. That's Microsoft's approach.
Yeah.
Depends in that case, because with authentication and things like that, you can just look after a very poorly implemented and maintained SSO library. You've then got tech there for years over, and only one person knows it. Technically, that's why a lot of people go to IAM companies, because
And it's complex.
Yeah.
Really complex, right.
But then you look at how successful that attack on Okta. There was the one on Okta where they went in. It was multi-stage. So it was there was a bit of social engineering against the web help desk, against the support desk, get a privileged user account, add another identity provider. But when it actually worked, you think, yeah, it was totally silent then, because nobody knew. They weren't actually set the original one. Again, then it was game over. Just think, yeah, when it is game over, it's properly game over. So that's just sorry, I'm just looking up thinking, yeah, I'm still going with it, but I don't know what others. It's just one of those ones that until something catastrophic happens.
It's a balancing act, though. You just have to take your specific needs and requirements and try and come up to a judgment. You're never going to find a perfect solution, and what will be perfect or the best for someone is not going to be the best for someone else.
So there's a scale, isn't it? You're typically, most people will get a far more secure, better designed, better run service from an aggregated cloud provider than you would ever be able to provide in-house. That's fun. I guess you just got to work out what your incident response is. How do you, if something catastrophic happens, press the kill switch? So yes, it's going to cause business disruption, but you've not got access into your systems. How do you, what do you do in that event?
It's a good point because of an SSO playbook.
Yeah.
SSO is a playbook. I don't. I will send you. Other people might.
I don't know how we're doing for time. I can stop there. Happy. I've got a few slides on threat modelling that I could run through, but if you want to hand over.
Let's just come over after 7 o'clock. So depends what we normally sort of put an hour aside for each talk. You started at 1:15, was it?
Are people interested in the basics of threat modelling? If it's something that we all
I'm interested as well.
fun. Okay. So I agree to this because I think it's quite a nice segue. So threat modelling, as I said, is one really good technique that we can use to try and embed secure by design thinking into our organisations. But what is threat modelling? What does it mean? How do we do it? Do we require big fancy tools? Do we need to, like the Microsoft solution, do we need to have a manual and learn and go on courses to do it? Do we need complex skills in-house to do that? How do we start to embed that in? Fundamentally, there are 4 questions that we're asking. The process of threat modelling can be boiled down into these 4 questions. What are we working on? And then how do we represent that? How do we diagram it? How do we draw it? How do we talk about it? How do we describe it? Write it down? And then thinking about what could go wrong. That's using our understanding to think like an attacker, to think about how things could be misused. So use your imagination. We'll talk about techniques and how you can do that in a moment. Once you've worked that out, what are we going to do about it? Designing our countermeasures. And then at the end of that continuous improvement cycle, go back and ask yourself, did we do a good enough job? Repeat, rinse, repeat until you sort of get it. So fundamentally, that's what threat modelling is. There's a mnemonic that we can use to start to remember this. DICE, so diagram, identify threats, countermeasures, and evaluate. It's just one of the tools that we've got when we're talking about security. Rough, development to pipeline threat modelling as early as possible, but there are other tools that we can use along the pipeline to improve the security of our solution, improve the security of our product development. But what is a threat? What does that mean in terms of risks and attacks and all those sorts of language? So this is quite a cool diagram. It's stolen from a book, the title of which is at the bottom of this slide, Threat Modelling and Practical Guide for Development Teams. Start with a system, and that system has both data and functionality. And the data creates value for your business. And the value of that, and the value that data creates, that system has, informs your risk. We'll come back to that. But functionality it's got to be built, it's got to be designed by humans, it's got to be coded by humans, at least at the moment, and it's going to contain weaknesses as a result. So those weaknesses can expose data, for example, or it can break the functionality. And that results, if it's exploitable, and that's a key if, in some sort of vulnerability. But just having a vulnerability isn't going to do any damage. That's just something that exists. It's just a bug, a mistake, an error. You need somebody malicious who's going to try and do something with that. So that threat actor, through their motivation, be that criminal, be that hacktivism, be that boredom, whatever that motivation is, creates a threat by exploiting those vulnerabilities and generates a risk. And your risk, as we all know, is impact and likelihood, and you can measure that in whatever way suits you, and there are lots of frameworks to do that. So that's what a threat is. So when we're thinking about threat modelling, this is what we're trying to identify. Who wants to hurt us? Why? How? That's the sort of question we need to be imagining. How do we think about what could go wrong? So one technique is doomsday scenarios, which sounds very dramatic, but effectively it's brainstorming what could possibly go wrong. If we think about our system, if we think about our organisation, what would be an absolutely catastrophic worst case scenario to occur, and then work backwards. How would that unfold? What sort of threat events would happen? What sort of impact on our systems? What weaknesses does that mean would be in there if that were to happen? Can we check for those weaknesses? Can we make sure we can design them out?
Are they all, so I call it bad outcomes, is that the same sort of thing? So finding bad outcomes up front.
Yeah, I think, so the other thing doomsday scenarios are designed to do, they're designed to be, I did a strategy course ages and ages and ages ago, and the tutor spoke about, when you're thinking about a vision or a strategy, he spoke about the big, hairy, audacious goal, which is about, thinking of your vision as something outlandish and potentially unattainable, something that is just really wild and wacky, something from a movie, and then go backwards and refine it. And I think it's a similar thing. It's about inspiring imagination and getting people to think about what could go wrong. It's a tool to start those conversations.
I tend to think of like a doomsday scenario, something that removes the complete functionality of what my software was there to do in the first place. So, for instance, about writing authentication software, you can completely bypass authentication. That's going to be a doomsday scenario out there. So, I tend to think of the worst case scenarios that way and go backwards.
Yeah, absolutely. What some examples of that? So regulatory impact, revocation of an operating license. So PCI-DSS is a good example. Material lost revenue, market, share value affecting things, reputational damage, things like that. And how do you do this? Team activity, you can't do it on your own because you don't have enough imagination. You're going to be stuck in your assumptions and your understanding of the system. So get together with people, different people with different opinions and different perspectives, and brainstorm. Time limited. So actually say, right, we've got 10 minutes, go. Just throw ideas out there, stick it on a whiteboard, stick it on a piece of paper, whatever you want to do, but time limited. And then identify who's got the motive to do that, and then pick the top 3, go from there, refine them, bring it to repeat. So what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that threat modeling is often something that's seen as a very skilled activity that requires a lot of time, requires tools, requires input. It can be done quickly, and the most effective way to get threat modeling to improve security by design is to embed it in your development teams and product teams right at the beginning. You want them to do 10-minute exercises on each sprint to identify the threats that they're going to be doing. If you're going to use this technique, it's really important that you set the right culture. No stupid ideas. Don't joke or ridicule about something because you're going to shut down thought patterns by doing that. It's designed to be imaginative. So create the rules first. Make sure your team know why you're there and what you're doing, and this is the framework for doing it. For repeating last time. Adam Shostak, so you've written a couple of books. You've released another one recently, actually, which is threat modeling using Star Wars as a sort of illustration for it, which I'm inspired. But he said that a good threat model is one that produces valid findings. That's it.
You mean that? Just that.
Yes. So there are frameworks you can use. You don't have to. That's the point. Threat modeling can just be a brainstorming activity, but there are frameworks that you can use to structure your thinking. STRIDE is a very probably the most well-known one. So it stands for, it's a mnemonic again, stands for spoofing. Can you falsify your identity in order to gain access to a system? Tampering, so can you ruin data? Can you corrupt it in some way? Repudiation, can you do things without traceability? Can you cause damage without it being in logs? Can you hide your tracks? Information disclosure does what it says on the tin, as does denial of service. and elevation of privilege, getting in and then getting more privileges to attack the system. And you can tackle those with these controls. That's it. Thanks very much. Any questions?
That's a quick question, sorry. It's like other people's experience with the Stride model, because I have used it in the past, but I've often found that it's kind of a bit too rich. I'm thinking, oh, I've got to have something under spoofing, or I've got to have something under. Actually, it doesn't matter if I don't think of anything under that, just think of less things.
Yeah.
I don't know, whether other people find it sort of drive discussion, oh, we've got to have an S, we've got to have a T.
No, I don't think you have to at all. So using those frameworks is good. We do require a certain degree of knowledge to use them properly. So, if you're going to use a framework like that, the first bit of advice would be, understand it yourself and go to training and learn about it and what have you, but then educate the people who are going to be doing it. So have education sessions with product managers, with engineers, etc., before you start doing the modelling so that they understand what's driving it.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Yes, pleasure.
Very, very interesting.
Yes. The last round
Could I steal 5 minutes of Dan's time
Yep.
and do the quick zap?
Yes. Do you want to do that? Because at some point I want to maybe you get a drink and stuff, and then we go back.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so Dan, could I preempt you slightly? So while we all get set up, if you want to talk to Chris about another drink or food or stuff, yeah.
Or there's pizza. My slides.
Yeah, if you want to do that, yeah. Could I steal 5 minutes before you start? Because I've got a presentation on
You need the.
So I don't know. I'll go get my
Yeah, if you're. You've got Simon on there. The name of the developer.
Oh yeah, Simon Bennis is on. Is actually on.
Yeah.
Oh well, Simon.
Yeah. Give me a software procurement.
Oh, thank you.
Right.
The streaming works, really.
It works, but